everyone, it's Matt, and today I will be talking to you about Pixar. With Inside Out coming out this weekend, I realized that several of my favorite films of all time have been by Pixar, and they've come out with some really great stuff. So I thought it would be a fun topic to ramble about. In this video, I am planning on going over my thoughts on all 15 Pixar movies so far. And I'll also throw in a few fun facts that you may or may not have already known about Pixar and their movies. So, let's get started. First, in I believe 1995, was Toy Story. And if you were born in the 90s, the early 90s particularly, like I was, you will almost definitely know Toy Story very well. It was a huge phenomenon at the time, and rightfully so, because I believe it was the first completely computer-generated feature film. I could be wrong about that, but if not the first, it was the first blockbuster success as far as those go. And if somehow you've not seen Toy Story, it is a fairly simple story about a group of toys in a kid's room that whenever humans aren't around, they come to life and have their own personalities and events and all these other things. But when the humans show up, they have to play dead, of course, because they're toys. While it was a pretty simple concept, and by today's standards, the animation isn't anything amazing, I have a huge soft spot for this movie simply because I grew up with it. I have a lot of nostalgia with it, and sometimes I think the simplest movies can be some of the best ones. It is very funny, very entertaining, and for the first feature-length CGI film, it is very technically well done and seamless. You kind of forget that you're even watching computer animation to an extent. Like it doesn't stick out as the thing about the movie. It's just a good movie regardless. I don't really think I need to talk too much about Toy Story because it's just so well known. But even more than 2 or 3, I think the first one will always be my favorite. Though I know they are working on Toy Story 4. I try not to get my hopes up as far as hyping things up just in case my expectations will be let down. But I can't help but be very optimistic for Toy Story 4 when it comes out in, I think, 2017 or 2018. Anyway, next, after Toy Story, they released A Bug's Life. And A Bug's Life, admittedly, is not one of my favorite Pixar films. I wasn't a huge fan of it as a kid, so I don't quite have the same sense of nostalgia. Though, coming back to it as an adult, I watched it more recently, and I appreciate it a lot more. I feel like, on some levels, it can be best appreciated by adults as opposed to children. Which is something I've noticed a lot about Pixar's movies. While they are definitely enjoyable by children, and they're marketed as kids or family movies, on a certain level, many of them work in ways that only adults can fully appreciate, I think. As far as some of the life lessons and other complex, deep story bits, the subtleties, I guess. But yeah, Bug's Life, while not one of my favorite Pixar films, was still pretty good. It is about a group of bugs and their, I guess, debt to an army of grasshoppers, who are quite obviously the bad guys, but like Toy Story, this one wasn't quite as impressive visually as the more recent stuff, but what can you expect? It was the 90s. I believe it was 1998 this came out. And come to think of it, while it isn't necessarily as impressive visually, the fact that they did equal or better quality to Toy Story with more natural things like grass and wildlife was pretty cool, especially at the time. Either way, it's still a pretty funny movie. I don't think it's nearly as memorable or emotional as many of their others, but still worth seeing. Next up was Toy Story 2. Oddly enough, this is one of the earlier movies I can remember seeing in theaters. I don't really have many memories of seeing things in theaters as a kid, but I do vividly remember seeing this in theaters, and as you might expect, I loved it. Toy Story 2 is what many people consider the best Toy Story film. It was personally my least favorite, but I still love all of them a whole lot. This movie, I think, was more emotional, a bit darker than the first one. I like some of the new characters, and stuff like Al's Toy Barn was pretty great. One notable thing about this movie, there's a scene that many people have mentioned triggers their ASMR, and that is the scene where Woody is being repaired. You can actually find it on YouTube if you want to watch it, both with and without music, which is interesting because apparently the Toy Story 2 DVD came with a version of the movie that does not include the score, I guess for people who wanted to appreciate the Foley work, the sound design and everything, which admittedly is very impressive in animated movies, especially Pixar. As for that scene and the ASMR aspects of it, I have actually considered trying to do some sort of recreation of it, and I know many people have actually done videos inspired by it and other things like that. But I want to try doing a more literal recreation, as in buying a Woody doll and trying to make the camera feel like his point of view. But I cannot promise anything. It's definitely a very ambitious project as far as the details I have in mind, so I wouldn't expect it anytime soon, if at all. But it is on my list of things that I could do one day. Okay, so after Toy Story 2 was Monsters Incorporated. And Monsters Incorporated, I thought was awesome. It's one of the more original ideas, in my opinion, that Pixar has come up with. For those of you who have not seen it, it's about a parallel world in which monsters live normal, human-like lives. They go to work, they have school, normal day-to-day stuff. But when it comes to humans, they're terrified of them. Just like humans are terrified of monsters. It's kind of like the saying that spiders are more scared of you than you are scared of them. It's kind of funny. But the movie hinges around Monsters Incorporated, which is a company that generates electricity by using doors, which are portals into children's bedrooms, and scaring them and collecting their screams for energy. It's a very unique idea, and they do an amazing job of things like world building and subtleties and kind of just their own versions of life in that world. And to top it off, it is hilarious. It is, in my opinion, one of the funnier Pixar movies. I've always been particularly entertained by comedic takes on dark or potentially scary subjects, and though this is quite obviously suitable for children, it still retains that kind of feeling to me. sometimes around my friends, I like to do an impression of Boo saying, Mike Wazowski. And they're always terrified at how it sounds exactly like her. So yeah, if you ever wanted to imagine me sounding like a little girl screaming Mike Wazowski, you can do that. But I can't do it in this video because it's way too loud. Let's see. I think that's all I have to say about Monsters Incorporated for now. But next was Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Finding Nemo is a very cute, fun movie. It's got a sense of energy about it that a lot of movies don't have. And it's just visually gorgeous. Just very great animation, colors, etc. And also hilarious to boot. Finding Nemo, while it does have its emotional moments, I don't think it was quite as emotional as a lot of other Pixar movies, though I haven't watched it in a while, so I could be wrong. Either way, I like all of the kind of pop culture things Finding Nemo has spawned. Things like B. Sherman 42, Wallaby Way, Sydney. And one. For those of you who have not seen it, I probably sound crazy, but those were the sequels in the movie. And I don't know, it's just, I would say it's in a way one of my favorites, but I wouldn't consider it necessarily one of their best movies. It's kind of just middle of the pack, though I'm sure many will disagree with me. Either way, I loved it, as I do with most Pixar films. Next up was The Incredibles, and this was one of the few Pixar films that I did not actually see in theaters for one reason or another. And I am so sad that I did not get to see it back when it was all hyped up, because I watched it a few years later, and it is awesome. Those of you who've seen The Incredibles don't need me to explain why, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's one of the most fun superhero movies I've ever seen. It feels less like a kid's animated film and more just like a family-friendly, yet really, really well-done superhero movie. It's got some really, really great characters, and it's also one of the funniest superhero movies I've seen, while still being exciting. It's very difficult to have that balance, in my opinion, of exciting and funny as far as superhero movies go. I think a lot of them try to do both and don't necessarily succeed completely on either one, or only one but not the other, but I think this does both very well. And I am very excited to see the sequel, which is apparently being worked on. But yeah, The Incredibles, I did not give it as much attention as I should have at first, but now that I've seen it, I'm very happy with it. So next up was Cars. Cars was the, I think, only other Pixar movie I have not seen in theaters. And I think at the time I avoided this one because I had not heard such great reviews. A lot of people were kind of calling it Pixar going down to average quality or something else like that. And well, I think time has shown that it's actually a pretty decent movie. I can see why it may have discouraged me at the time. Though, to be honest, I can't really remember exactly why I never saw it in theaters. Regardless, I did enjoy this movie when I saw it. I don't think it's one of their best at all. I think it's more towards the bottom. But I think it's perfectly enjoyable and well done. And if I understand correctly, the Cars movies are kind of a passion project for one of the top guys at Pixar. I think it was John Lasseter. Not entirely sure, I could be wrong. But John Lasseter, I guess, has a soft spot for these characters, and so, especially in this movie, it is very clear. And I can definitely say I enjoyed it. Again, not one of my favorites, but still worth watching. After Cars, we had Ratatouille. And Ratatouille, in my opinion, is probably the most underappreciated Pixar film. It's definitely one of my favorites, and it is incredibly well done. It is beautifully animated, emotional, hilarious, unique. Yet somehow I feel like it doesn't get a whole lot of recognition. I know it got great reviews and everything, but I feel like it's not really talked about much. That's a bit of a shame, but for those of you who do appreciate it, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say it's really, really good. Great characters, and so on. For those of you who have not seen it, which I imagine there are some of you, it is about a rat who wants to become a chef. And so he does by finding an amateur chef, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I watched it. An amateur chef, and manipulating him by pulling his hair like a puppet to have him cook, because apparently the rat has amazing cooking skills, but not the right kind of body to pull them off. Anyway, I won't spoil anything about it, but if you've not seen it, I would highly recommend it. After Ratatouille was Wall-E, and I know that voice probably sounded really stupid, because I can't do the Wall-E voice quietly, but I can kind of do it loud, like the Mike Wazowski voice. Wall-E, in my opinion, is one of Pixar's most ambitious films, particularly because the first third or so is almost completely wordless, just sound effects and music and visuals. It almost feels like an art film in some ways, and I can see why it might get a little boring for kids, but I don't even think it does, because when I saw it, the kids were entertained the whole time. For those of you who have not seen it, Wall-E is about a robot, specifically a cleanup robot, left on Earth after everyone leaves due to overpollution. And so he sits there for years and years and years and years cleaning up trash, as he's supposed to. But over time he develops a personality and becomes lonely. A lonely robot. And shortly after, or maybe not so shortly, I'm not sure, a spaceship lands on Earth, and it is a robot from the future, a apparently female robot, and he basically falls in love with the robot, and it's about what happens after that, and I won't spoil it, but I would highly recommend it, and I don't know, it's just incredibly well done. In my opinion, one of the best looking Pixar movies, especially the stuff on Earth. And some parts it actually almost looks real if you're not paying too close attention. And it's got some really, really great music as well. And on the topic of great music, the next one was Up. Up may be close to or tied with Toy Story for my favorite Pixar film, and one of my favorite films ever, along with Toy Story. And as I was saying, it has an awesome soundtrack. One of the few Pixar movie soundtracks I can just pull up in my head because it's that memorable. Many of you know Up as the movie that gives you more feels in the first 10 minutes than most movies do in their entirety. And I can tell you that while I'm not someone who cries during movies, this movie almost made me cry in the first 10 minutes. And I know many, 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 funniest, most uplifting movies I've seen, and one of the most heart-crushingly depressing movies I've ever seen. It's kind of almost a paradox, if you will. But it is a movie about a guy, or not a guy, an old man who, after living life as a balloon salesman and never really getting to go on the dream vacation he wanted to go on, decides one day to tie tons and tons of balloons to his house and fly away on a vacation to some faraway land. And unknowingly, he gets I forget what they call it in the movie, but it's basically their own version of a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout, who is basically the exact opposite of the old man's personality, loud and annoying and hyperactive. And it's about their journey and what happens when they get to the place they're going. And I won't spoil anything other than that, but it is incredibly effective in so many ways and very well done. One of my favorites, easily. After Up was another movie that made tons and tons of people cry. Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3 is my second favorite Toy Story movie. And it's a movie that I for some reason, did not think they could pull off. Sequels are already hard enough as it is, but third movies, I don't know, I feel like they sometimes just go off the deep end. And Toy Story 3, while very unique compared to the others in certain ways, was astoundingly well done for a third movie in a series done over 10 years after the last one. I don't know, there's a lot you could say about it, but I think it plays to nostalgia incredibly well. If you grew up with the Toy Story movies, Toy Story 3 will be incredibly effective. And I was surprised by how dark Toy Story 3 is at times. It is downright creepy and sometimes terrifying. I can't imagine being a kid watching it. For example, without spoiling anything, you guys will know what I'm talking about when I say, "Get rid of that monkey." And a certain scene near the very end where I almost thought they were going to do something that they didn't, but it was very convincing. Either way, definitely one of my favorites, and worth a watch if you've somehow not seen it, along with the other Toy Story movies. Next was Cars 2. Cars 2 is probably the only Pixar movie I have no desire to ever watch again. That's not saying I didn't like it. I did enjoy it when I watched it, but I did not. I barely remember anything about it, aside from a couple of the jokes. And I don't know, to me, it felt kind of just like a merchandising opportunity. Like Pixar wanted to capitalize on the success of the toys from the first Cars movie by giving people a reason to buy more. Again, not to say it's a bad movie, it just doesn't have that Pixar charm to me. It just kind of feels like they took some of the familiar characters and put them in a generic CGI kids movie. And I feel like that discredits the people who worked on the movie, because again, one more time, it's still a decent movie. It's just when you compare it to everything else Pixar has done, it feels kind of almost phoned in, if you will. Either way, I think it was still worth watching once. And Brave was the next one. Brave to me felt less like a Pixar movie and more like a high-end Disney animated movie, kind of like Frozen and so on. I think it was better than Cars 2, but it was also one of my least favorite Pixar movies. I don't remember too much about it, and I don't really feel like I'd want to watch it again necessarily. but it was more unique and felt more genuine than Cars 2 in my opinion. That said, really the best thing I can say about this movie is the animation was incredible, especially things like Merida's hair. And I liked the stuff with the bears. That was pretty good. It kind of just felt like a fairy tale in Pixar style. But I feel like it could have been pulled off a little better. That said, I still think all of Pixar's movies are good. After Brave, they started to go back uphill again, I think, with Monsters University. And while Monsters University, I don't think it could ever live up to Monsters Incorporated, was still perfectly good. It was very funny, very entertaining, had some emotion to it as well. But I think it did compete with Monsters Inc. in a way kind of unlike Toy Story 2 and 3, where it's quite obviously, those are obviously sequels. Monsters University had to contend with being a prequel and kind of just taking those characters and putting them in a completely different situation. And I think for the most part it worked, but it felt like a little something was missing. I can't put my finger on it. Either way, I really did enjoy it a lot. And if I remember correctly, they finally introduced some crazy new lighting system for this movie, and it looked really great from a technical standpoint, but I know most people probably didn't notice that. But yeah. Oh, and I think one of my favorite parts of this movie is the mom sitting in the car. I forget exactly what she says. She says something like, "Oh, don't worry, I'll wait here listening to my music." And then she puts on some kind of metal. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was exactly what you'd expect from a monster mom. It was great. And finally, we have Pixar's most recent movie, released this weekend, Inside Out. I saw Inside Out last night, and I can say that it quickly moved up to one of my favorite Pixar films ever. It's a movie that I somehow didn't really have much hope for, I guess considering the less than amazing past few Pixar movies. But, I don't know, I feel like it's Pixar's return to form in many ways. It is hilarious, one of the funniest Pixar movies I've seen, but also one of the most emotional ones, as you would expect for a movie about emotions. Because I'm sure many of you have not seen it yet. I won't really say too much, because I think you should go in knowing as little as possible about it. But I will say that I really loved it. And on top of that, I think that in many ways it's one of Pixar's most adult-friendly films. Not necessarily because of jokes that kids wouldn't get, but because of the complexity of the story and the depth of the themes. The themes in the movie, without really getting into them, are kind of things that I don't think kids can really relate to. They're kind of things that you have to experience for yourself while growing up to really fully embrace. And if it's any indication, I think that I heard more laughing and more sniffling from the adults than the kids in the theater. But at the same time, it's one of the most colorful, child-friendly looking movies. It's not really what you'd expect from the previews. But yes, if you've not seen it, as I know many of you have not yet, I'd highly recommend it, especially if you've been a bit less than impressed by Pixar's more recent stuff. So, after that, I know The Good Dinosaur is coming out in November. I don't really know what to expect. I'm not really putting my expectations anywhere, but I have heard that this went through a lot of production trouble and many changes, so let's hope that isn't a bad sign. Could be pretty cool, though. I wonder how it'll compare to Jurassic World, though. It's the year of the dinosaur movies. Anyway, all that, I think my current ranking of Pixar films would be as follows from best to worst. And this may change slightly depending on what mood I'm in, but here it goes. Best to worst. Toy Story. Up. Wall-E. Toy Story 3. Inside Out. Toy Story 2. Monsters Incorporated. Ratatouille. The Incredibles. Finding Nemo. Cars. Monsters University. A Bug's Life. Brave. And finally, Cars 2. And just to finish this video off, I think I'll just give you guys a bit of Pixar trivia, just a few little things. So the Pizza Planet truck, if you've seen Toy Story, you'll know what I'm talking about. The Pizza Planet truck actually makes an appearance in almost every Pixar movie, either subtly or not so subtly. When I say almost everyone, I know it's not in The Incredibles, though some people claim it is. I believe that they said that it's most likely not. They weren't sure. The director apparently didn't ask to have it put in there, so he's not sure if it is, but I don't think it is. And I didn't notice it in Inside Out, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. Also in most Pixar movies is the ball from one of their earliest shorts, Luxo Jr. So you can keep an eye out for those two things next time you're watching Pixar movies. Another thing you can keep an eye out for is the classroom number. It's A113. A113 was the classroom number for the animation class that many people at Pixar actually took at the California Institute of the Arts. So you'll often see it on things like doors and license plates and so on in Pixar movies, and actually in many animated things like The Simpsons and other things. It's pretty neat little reference there. Also, in many Pixar movies, you'll find references to the movie that is to come after it. So, for example, Finding Nemo came out after Monsters Incorporated, and in Monsters Incorporated, one of the toys that Boo plays with, actually Boo gives it to Sully, is a Nemo doll. So, if you're looking closely enough, you can get a hint at what the next movie is going to be like for Pixar, if you know what to look for. It's kind of interesting. And one last thing to talk about. Toy Story 2 was almost completely lost during its production, deleted forever, when an employee accidentally ran some code that wiped out their hard drives for the movie. And while I'm sure everyone was freaking out, it turned out that an employee that had been working from home after giving birth had a copy of the movie on a computer at home. So they went over to her house and wrapped up the computer in blankets and drove it as carefully as possible. After all, there was like millions of dollars of work there, all the way back to the studio, and recover the backup. And they were able to actually get most of it back. But apparently, shortly after, they scrapped the entire thing, or almost the entire thing, after realizing that they wanted to take it in a different direction. And apparently they actually ended up doing the majority of Toy Story 2 in the last 9 months before its release, after they decided it had to be redone. So I can imagine that was incredibly stressful, but it definitely paid off because Toy Story 2 was a huge success. think that's about it for tonight. I'd like to thank you guys for watching or listening, if you will. And I hope you enjoyed that. If you're not already asleep, I'd like to wish you a